The closes the regular monthly council meeting of the Garrett Park Town Council. First order of business is approval of the agenda as circulated. If I could hear a motion to approve the agenda. Second,
Second.
any discussion? All in favor? Agenda has been approved. We move to the consent agenda consisting of the council meeting minutes of the regular meeting of March 10 and special meeting of March 24, together with my appointment of Carmen Clark to the Arboretum Committee. I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Great.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Good. Presentations by residents.
Oh, good.
Hello, Phil.
Now he's muted.
It's a great time for my folks to please speak into the microphone. Phil won't bring them, don't speak into the microphone.
Perhaps we should give Phil a sound check opportunity. Let me text
Okay.
him.
You have some residents.
All right. This is the town council meeting and we are a tiny bit ahead, so we are in the presentations by residents. Are you here to make a presentation or just to observe us?
Here.
Okay,
Not gonna get the microphone until the show address.
You
Maybe
can-
we can put it down a little bit.
or you can hold it like a rock star.
If Phil is no longer muted.
You take the thing out.
If
Yes,
he
you
can
can.
just hold it.
Just lift it up. Just hold it.
There.
My name is Ethan Bussey. I live on 11003 Stillwater Avenue. Is that what?
You're doing great.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I am here to do a merit badge.
Do a what?
Merit badge requirement.
Oh,
A merit
merit badge
badge.
requirement.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
what is your merit badge requirement?
Oh,
I am working on citizenship in the community.
Is there anything you need from us?
No,
Just-
I am here because the goal is to be here, basically, so.
Is there anything you'd like to know about the town council and the mayor?
Or do you want to make a motion, or is there anything you want us to vote on?
Tell us your name again.
My name is Ethan Bussey.
Ethan Bussey? Can we have this be Ethan Bussey Day?
I go to school at Garrett Park Elementary School.
ah,
What would you like to see improved about the town? You like everything? Okay,
We're
I
very
do like
glad to have
everything Except some of the roads are very confusing on when you're going from one side. On the other side, it's really easy to get out. Like, it's hard to find out where you're going when you're going in.
Hmm,
When you're leaving, it's incredibly easy.
Yeah.
that's a good
understandable.
point, actually.
Good point, thank you.
We have obstruction of view. in some
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
intersections.
like the ones that go like,
Right, where the road splits.
yeah, but like not at 90-degree angles.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
That's a good point.
Welcome to our town council meeting. We're glad you could join us today. And good luck with your merit badge.
Yeah,
We understand.
That's
It's
fine.
late at times.
We might adjourn tomorrow morning. Thank you for joining us.
yes. So, every year the town adopts a budget for the coming year. Tells us where we get our money and where we spend our money. We will be doing that a little later this evening. But first, we hold a hearing, which is just an opportunity for anyone who is interested to come and tell us their views about, specifically about the budget. It's been out there for comment. And a lot of things, it influences what each household in Garrett Park pays in taxes, town taxes, and it governs the way those monies are spent. Parks, roads, what have you. So this is now the hearing portion of that process. And just to address the budget as it has been proposed, we do so now. And I don't see lots of people interested in doing so, but we will, sure, absolutely.
I'm Stephanie Bussey on behalf of Cub Scout Pack 521. I co-lead with Michael Luckenhouse. We wanted to say thank you for continuing to support Scouts and enabling us to use this great space, especially on rainy days when we can't be meeting in the park. And we enjoy bearing the flags in the annual 4th of July parade. And we would always appreciate the opportunity to store some of our gear here or somewhere other than just our Pinewood Derby track is in the basement of the Garrett Park Nursery. And there was a water leakage and it destroyed our rope bridge that we use for bridging ceremonies. And we're of course nervous that something will happen to this wooden track that's at least 50 years old.
Is it still leaking, do you know?
Not presently, but
Okay.
it's a little scary down there. And that's all I'd like to say.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. All right. Well, we will close the hearing. The public hearing with respect to ordinance number 2025-4, adopting the capital operating and ARPA budgets for the year beginning July 1, 2025 and ending June 30, 2026. We will return to that later. The town manager's report, including the financial report. Barbara?
Sure, thank you. Included in your agenda packet is the financial report for the month of March. Just two items of note. One is I just wanted to highlight that this report does incorporate the modifications made to the FY 2025 budget by enactment of ordinance number 2025-1. Also, if you look at the capital, you may have noticed on line 25.0 equipment, this was funding that was added at the time of the budget amendment, anticipating what our cost would be for outfitting the new pickup truck. Those costs did come in a little bit higher than what we had anticipated. So currently there is a negative balance in that account of $489. If there's no objection, we would basically just transfer $489 from the contingency account to make up for that shortfall in that line item. Any concerns? Kind of moving on, you may remember back in January, Kayla gave a report briefing you on the Time to Care Act and the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. This was related to legislation passed in 2022 by the legislature. The Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program is designed to provide up to $1,000 per week for up to 12 weeks for employees who are eligible and submit a claim to the state. As we talked about last month, the Maryland Department of Labor had requested that the General Assembly take action to delay implementation of the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. Obviously, they're fairly busy trying to support federal workers who are being impacted by changes there, and also trying to support Maryland employers and workers. General Assembly wrapped up last week, as you know, and they did enact the requested legislation delaying aspects of the program by 18 months. So instead of starting our mandatory employer contributions as of July 1st of 2025, it's now been delayed until January 1st of 2027. For employees who might try to access benefits from the program, there's not a definitive date, but that was scheduled to go into effect July 1st of 2026. It's now been moved to a date yet to be determined by the Department of Labor, but it will be somewhere between January 1st of 2027 and January 3rd of 2028. So currently no budgetary impact for the town for foreseeable future. Did want to share with you all that last Thursday, April 9th, Norton Land Design submitted the mandatory referral application for Yendell Park to the Montgomery County Planning Department. Mike Norton reached out on the 10th to let me know that the application package had been accepted through pre-screening and was moved to intake. Basically, the pre-screening process, as the name suggests, at Montgomery County Planning is just someone going through and making sure all the required component parts were in fact part of the application. Just kind of a notation for the record. I include in the agenda packet an email that I had received from Greg Wiedemann with Wiedemann Architects providing a progress report on the design development phase activities for the Town Hall renovation project. Speaking of Town Hall, this is not in your agenda packet because it's very recent news. I had emailed you all last Friday sharing with you that I had been contacted by Senator Zucker's office on March 25th. If you're not familiar with Senator Zucker, he represents District 14 in Montgomery County. I was a little taken aback by the request because his chief of staff was asking me to fill out an application for FY 2026 funding. And so after a little bit of back and forth with his chief of staff, the long story short is he had been contacted by County Council Member Kate Stewart, who represents Garrett Park, making him aware of local jurisdictions such as Garrett Park who were impacted by the federal budget continuing resolution and saw their earmark applications basically stopped dead in their tracks and killed. County Council Member Stewart had reached out to State Senator Zucker asking for his support for those of us who found ourselves in that position. Kate likes our project and does a good job of representing municipalities, being a former municipal mayor. It was a very brief form that I was asked to fill out. I filled that out after clarifying that they weren't confusing us with someone else. And pleased to share with you that Senator Zucker's efforts appear to have been successful. I reached out to his chief of staff to ask her what was the outcome of everything, candidly not expecting very much. His chief of staff emailed me back to basically say, yes, we did receive funding. You were awarded $500,000.
How much?
Wow.
$500,000. That was the amount that I included in the little one-page sheet that they asked me to fill out, basically saying this was the amount of our federal earmark request that had made it through Senate appropriations. She basically said the final reprint of the capital budget is not available until Monday or Tuesday. It was not available today. But here's a draft, and she sent me a copy of the page where it had been added into the Senate budget bill.
But the
So-
budget's not been approved yet, or it has?
No, the budget has been approved. It's just not publicly available, the
It
final
has been
printed
approved.
copy.
Got the money.
That's what she told me.
So we got $500,000 for the town hall.
That's great.
And it was the easiest application I have ever
That's-
filled out.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
To be fair, you did the work last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Repurposed the work you had done for the federal grant.
yeah. I mean, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say, I think a lot of the credit goes to County Council member and County Council President Kate Stewart.
We should write her a letter to thank
We
her.
will. I think we owe
That's
a
nice.
letter. I think we owe one to Senator Zucker. Clearly, he kind of picked up the ball when Councilmember Stewart reached out to him, and basically ran with it.
That's
So-
fantastic.
So that's
That's quite a
Great
surprise.
job.
the really good news for the night.
Yeah.
So yes, like I said, I did go online today just to find the final published budget. I think that the capital projects may be posted. The actual full state budget won't be available until the end of May.
So that's over and above the 300,000
Yes.
already.
It appears, as best as I can tell, like I said, this was all happening fairly quickly. It appears that it wasn't, there's two ways of getting, well, several ways of getting capital money through the state. One is for the governor to put it in his budget. There's the legislative bond initiative process, which is how we got the $300,000 last year. This appears to be a state legislative, just another pool of capital money, as best as I can tell. I have not actually talked to his chief of staff. I had just emailed her prior to tonight's meeting just to find out what had happened. So
Do you know how to draw that money out? Do you get it as a lump sum and put it into an account? or
it's
do you
all
give
gonna
them
be- it-
Invoices,
everything at the state generally is reimbursement based.
right?
Yeah, so like I say, once I actually know what pot of money it's coming from at the state, but there's a whole laundry list of capital projects, and it looks like some were stricken out. Ours was added back in because it's underlined in the Senate appropriations bill.
That's quite a surprise.
It was for me too.
Said state senate, what about the house?
No, this was part of the budget. Yes, no, the budget's done.
The
At the s-
budget-
budget is approved at the state level. It's done. The legislature has adjourned.
But when you say our request was underlined and some were crossed out, that implies that there's still some drafting to be done. Is that?
This was as this General Assembly was finishing up, there were obviously crossover bills. I mean, I can pass this down. So this was this is what the Chief of Staff for Senator Zucker sent me. I can just pass it down, but basically there was an entry that is underlined, probably meaning that it was added to the whole list of projects. And it says Garrett Park Town Hall, provide a grant to the mayor and council of the town of Garrett Park for the acquisition, planning, design, construction, expansion, repair. These were not my words, by the way, renovation, reconstruction, site improvement and capital equipping of Garrett Park Town Hall, in parentheses, Montgomery County, and 500,000.
Can we do a fist bump? Would that be part of it?
I'll say,
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. So. And last and not certainly least, as far as our maintenance team, it's obviously, and today actually finally feels like spring. You can turn off the heat at your homes. So they're doing a lot of sprucing up of the different town-owned properties with mulching, just pulling weeds. They will be in the next week or two finishing up this spring's tree planting. We had the time I wrote this, there were 7 trees remain to be planted. Phil Normandy told me today there were 3 left. I did want to share with you that our old pickup truck has been listed for sale on the government auction site, public surplus. That auction will close on April 20th. Proceeds from the sale of that truck were anticipated in this year's budget. And then lastly, and we'll be talking about this more later in the meeting, we did advertise the maintenance assistant position that was vacated by Oliver Fitch Flores. Kayla has had quite a bit of time spent recently on reviewing applications. We received over 350 applications for that vacancy. And that concludes my report unless there's any questions.
Can I ask a quick question, Barb? We had talked a while ago about putting in some pavers along the park on Rokeby, the children's park, so people could drop off their kids not in the middle of the street. Did that ever get done? I know it was on the list, but I haven't heard if it
Yeah.
ever got done.
Mayor, did you talk to Mr. Miller about that recently?
yeah, he has the materials.
Oh, good.
I guess perhaps when we have a third maintenance person.
So they're planning to do it. They
Oh,
just-
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, it's
that's
definitely
fine.
not, it's not been lost in the shuffle of
Good.
everything.
Thank you.
And that concludes my report.
Well, that's great news, Barb. Can we get something in the Bugle about that?
I think we're not to.
Okay, good.
He is. No, I would gesture towards you can. Yeah.
Um, so 7:53, we will move to the action items. Beginning with the contract award for routine and emergency tree services. Kayla, would you like to brief us on that?
I am happy to do so. So on May 13th, 2024, the town council authorized one-year extensions for 3 contracts. Those were with Bartlett Tree Experts, Empire Landscape LLC, and Save a Tree. The motion indicated that town staff were to issue an RFP for competitive bids prior to those extensions expiring on June 30th, 2025. As directed by council, an RFP was issued. I want to take a moment to emphasize that town consulting arborist Phil Normandy has been invaluable throughout that process. He reviewed the RFP, he offered suggestions, he provided advice and guidance. Mr. Normandy has answered many emails from me about this, and I am deeply grateful for his time and attention to getting through this process. Because I am not an arborist by trade, I am just pretty good at pulling together an RFP. That RFP was issued to the state procurement website, eMaryland Marketplace Advantage, or EMA, as you might have heard me mention before in our conversations about procurement. That was issued on February 26, 2025. Prospective bidders had until 5 p.m. on Friday, March 14th, 2025 to submit any questions they had. And bids were due at 12 p.m. on Monday, March 31st, 2025. So Mr. Normandy also helped with reviewing the bids that we received and making sure that everyone had the true technical expertise needed to take care of Garrett Park's numerous town-owned trees. And I do appreciate the time and attention he devoted to those bids, in addition to Town Manager Matthews serving as a wonderful sounding board as I reviewed and had questions. In terms of the bids that we received by the deadline, we did receive 4 bids. Bartlett Tree Experts and Empire Landscape LLC, who are current town vendors, did submit bids for a new contract. We're happy to see that they did that. New to the town process was Davy Tree. Davy Tree is technically a national company that has bought up several smaller tree service companies here in the area, but they've been operating in Maryland for many decades in some capacity. The other firm that we received from was Salvador Tree Service. I know Salvador Tree Service has been used by several town residents. Unfortunately, Salvador Tree Service submitted an incomplete bid and
What's the problem with their bid that they submitted?
they left off half of the pricing information. They only submitted pricing for the base contract years. Our RFPs are designed to require pricing be provided for 2 option years.
Okay,
Generally, it's better if we have that locked in early, even if town council elects not to exercise the option to extend.
right.
Did they have a chance to complete their bid?
They were actually the first bid that was submitted. They submitted it before the question deadline, which is somewhat uncommon. Generally, firms will wait until after the question deadline to see what other potential bidders have asked, make sure that they fully understand the information. Because of the severity of information that was left out, I consulted with Town Manager Matthews. We both agreed that it was such a grievous error that offering an opportunity to cure it would not be appropriate in the circumstance. It would substantially have changed significant elements of their bid. And so we informed them that they were disqualified. It was not our favorite thing to do. They are a local firm, and we do always like to try and keep Garrett Park business kind of in the regional community. But unfortunately, that was information that was vital for town council to have. So of the remaining 3 that were full and complete, Mr. Normandy and I reviewed them. And after consulting with Mr. Normandy and Town Manager Matthews, we are recommending that town council consider awarding contracts to multiple firms. Whether you elect to do that to 2 firms or 3 firms, That is a town council decision. The reason that we are recommending awarding multiple contracts is, again, we have a very high volume of town-owned trees. Town Manager Matthews and I have talked about, if we are ever hit with a particularly harsh storm, we will be left in an all-hands-on-deck situation. And we've also acknowledged that certain firms, while they all offer tree pruning, removal, deadwood removal, other services, have all developed their own specialty and niche. And sometimes it's nice to have an option who has a knack for doing thoughtful, careful pruning of the challenging trees on Strathmore, or who have experience with quickly, effectively, and safely taking down a dead tree further into town. I do want to say that we did not require a minimum crew size. That was something that was discussed with Mr. Normandy. And we all agreed that there are different ways to achieve the purpose. We wanted a variety of bids, and we felt that requiring a minimum or indicating a maximum crew size was not going to be helpful and beneficial. As attachment 1 to the staff memo, you can see the breakdown of per hour rates for each bid. At the bottom, there are some important notes and caveats. These are also included in the staff memo. But for those present, I do want to emphasize that Bartlett Tree Experts provided their pricing on a per man per hour basis, meaning if they sent out 3 men, we would multiply their hourly rate by 3. Davy Tree, for all but traffic control, provided pricing on a per hour basis for a 3-man crew. Their traffic control is provided on a per man per hour basis, recognizing that traffic control in various parts of town, it will look different on Rokeby than it would on Strathmore. And as such, the pricing might fluctuate. Empire Landscape provided pricing on a per hour basis for a 4-man crew. In talking with the Empire representative, the previous contract cycle, they had bid on the basis of a 3-man crew. Across their operations, they have adjusted to a 4-man crew as their standard. So as much
So
as
it
we,
looks like Bartlett's a lot less than the other two.
as
That's per,
man per hour.
Only do 1 and the other ones do 3 or 4.
Right, but, right.
So I do want to also emphasize that just because we execute a contract does not require that the town turn over business to any one particular firm. We do generally work with consulting arborist Phil Normandy to develop a list of tree work that needs done. Depending on the nature of the work, we might sometimes send that list to all of the firms that we have a contract with, asking for an estimate of how many man hours they anticipate. Using their rates, that lets us estimate what we'd be looking at. Sometimes if it is specialty work, or if we know that they have a particular skill set, if they're an existing vendor or have developed that skill set during a new contract, we might only reach out to one firm to ask for pricing. We're not obligated to give.
So these numbers, nobody did the math like to multiply. I mean, so these numbers, you have to multiply the Bartlett rates times 3 or 4.
If they send out a 3-man crew.
Right.
As mentioned before, and in consultation with Phil Normandy, we did not specify a minimum crew sizing standard. We wanted to encourage a variety of firms, not just those with aggressive national level staffing, to bid for these
But
contracts.
these numbers are 1 crew, 3 crew, and 4-man crews is what I'm looking at.
Sort
Yes,
of apples and oranges.
So it's not really right. So it's not, it's.
we
confusing.
have done our best to get a variety of firms. If you do not wish to award a contract to any one firm, that is of course town council discussion.
So we're not awarding work here.
You are not awarding work here.
We're giving the opportunity for future
Yes.
work, should it come up at a time of need.
Yes.
Okay, so might as well, why not just have all 3 on board?
Davy and Bartlett have minimum crew sizes that they supply.
They have not indicated a minimum crew size. I'm happy to reach out to them and confirm what their minimum size. Davy's pricing is for a 3-man crew. I can only assume that is their standard crew minimum. Bartlett, Town Manager Matthews, do you happen to know, having worked with Bartlett recently, what their standard crew sizing is? Okay, we do not have that information off the top of our head. Bartlett has been very responsive. If you would like me to reach out to them and come back at a future meeting with that information, we can do so. The bids are required to be valid for 90 days, so we do have some time, though I will remind you the contract extensions expire at the end of this fiscal year, and I think both Town Manager Matthews and I would like to make sure that you have new contracts in place with whichever firm or firms you would like to have before that existing contract expires.
So, one of the advantages to having these companies
Mhm.
reviewed in advance and on standby, so to speak, is that we can then meet the requirements of our permit with the state DNR.
Correct.
So just wanted to mention that that's an important part of this process.
Mhm.
But each time we have a group of work, we do ask one or more of the
Yes.
companies to give us a more specific bid so that we know what the cost of that specific group of work will be.
That is correct. We do it that way because we've
Right.
weather happens, trees get damaged. Something can develop, rot, and unfortunately need work that we couldn't anticipate at this point in time.
And if we need emergency work, then we
They
have
all-
more than one company on retainer. It's
Mhm.
more than one
Yes.
company.
And, I'm sorry, which have we worked with before?
We have worked with Bartlett and Empire. Those are folks we currently have contracts with and that town council extended approximately a year ago. Davy of the,
Are we
Well-
happy with them?
we are happy with them. Davy is kind of the newcomer on the block. I did speak with several of their municipal references. They had very, very glowing municipal references, particularly for their responsiveness to emergency situations. As mentioned in the staff memo, if they can get out that same night, if I make an evening call, they will do their best. If not, several other municipal folks indicated that they were there first thing in the morning, doing whatever they needed to do as soon as conditions allowed them to get to work, making things safe and functional again. So,
The other thing I'll point out, Lisa, is that the bid tabulation was provided by our town office staff. Whereas the individual bids were very clear that they were bidding 1-man hour or 3-man crew.
Right.
Or
It's
4.
just,
So it's not their fault that it's
Right.
presented
Yeah,
as
no,
if they were
right,
equal when they're
right,
apples and oranges.
I understand.
so if you could,
Can we move to retain all three of them?
Well, let's get a motion on the floor for further discussion.
I would second that motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
thank you all very much.
Bill has fallen off, right?
Yes, I did
Okay.
text him when he noticed.
Unanimous votes, folks.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened with Phil. I did text him and I haven't received a
All right.
response.
I
Yeah.
have lobbying. hangings here. If anyone wants one. Depends if I need them or not. But you can have, the first one's free. I'm just kidding. If anyone wants to take them.
The next action item is a contract award to independent audit services. Town Manager Matthews, if you'd like to give us some background.
Sure. So on March 13th, we issued RFP number 2025-2 for independent audit services. By way of background, the town has not solicited proposals for audit services for at least 10 years, which I would say is rather unusual in my experience. So we sought proposals for a 3-year contract with 2 additional 1-year extensions to be exercised in the town's sole discretion. The deadline for bidders to submit questions was March 24th, and the proposal submission deadline was April 3rd. We received 3 proposals by the submission deadline. Of those 3 proposals, 2 were deemed to be responsive and complete. Included in your agenda packet is a copy of the bid tabulation. So of the 2 proposals that were deemed to be responsive to the requirements of the RFP, I reviewed them, Kayla reviewed them, and Mary Rutke, our longtime contractual accountant, also reviewed the proposals. Those 2 proposals were submitted by Watson Rice LLP and Zelenkowski Axelrod LLC. Watson Rice is a national full-service accounting and consulting firm which has offices across the country. Its client list is predominantly very large local governments, including San Diego County, California, Prince George's County government, the Public Service Commission of the District of Columbia, the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Transit Administration, the City of Atlanta, the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and the City of Newark, New Jersey. As a full-service national accounting firm. They offer a lot of different services, including financial audits, program and performance audits, business process engineering, and program and organizational assessment. If they are selected, Watson Rice is proposing to use 2 subcontractors for the Garrett Park engagement. They provided resumes for the 2 subcontractors that they were proposing to use. One of the individuals, his work is heavily concentrated on federal agencies. The other subcontractor also listed a lot of federal agency experience. That individual seemed to specialize in public trust clearance reviews, auditing contractor incurred costs for contractors who are doing work for the federal government. This individual also does a lot of private company 401k audits. Of the anticipated 300 hours that Watson Rice anticipates would be required for Garrett Park's engagement, 180 hours of that 300 hours would be performed by the 2 subcontractors that I just described, rather than Watson Rice personnel. This was an issue that Ms. Rudke and I discussed. It's very uncommon in our experience that you will see the use of subcontractors on an engagement like Garrett Park. And so that does create some potential coordination issues. We are required to have our audit done by a certain date by state law. Ms. Rutke is our primary point of contact with the auditors. If there's any type of coordination issue, basically, that means she spends more time, which means her costs go up.
Barb, who's doing the audit now for us?
It was SB&C Company. They were the bid, Lisa, that basically missed a step in the proposal.
They say that again?
They were disqualified.
Why would they?
Oh,
One of the requirements, and it's standard in any type of RFP process, is you have to acknowledge receipt of a bid addendum because that becomes part of the contractual document. It's the responses to all the questions that were submitted. There were quite a few. What was particularly surprising about it is we had done some direct solicitation with firms that were known to do smaller municipal audits. And as our incumbent auditor, they were included in that group. And the bid addendum was specifically sent to that pool of applicants in addition to being posted on the state procurement site. And one of the first lines in the bid addendum was that you were to specifically acknowledge its receipt as a requirement. So not quite sure what happened there.
anybody talk to them or find out? I mean, how do their prices relate to these prices?
Well, I think the other part of it is there was a required form in the RFP that was incomplete. So, I mean, I think this is sort of the same issue that Kayla encountered. And what I would say is that I think Kayla's situation was probably more problematic because by the time the bids were opened, the firm that was disqualified would have known what other people bid. I mean, that's kind of totally undermining the fundamental integrity of a public procurement process. The only time in my tenure here that we have ever allowed someone, if you want to say it, to get a pass, is because they neglected to include a W-9. That's fairly insubstantial. I think when you're starting to forget things like pricing required forms, no, we don't generally give people an opportunity to cure, because when do you stop giving that opportunity? How bad does it have to be?
So how do because these prices vary a lot. So how do these prices compare to what we paid for the audit before this
The
contract?
company that
Was-
failed is S&B, the first one.
That is correct.
column one,
That is
right? So
correct.
their prices. going
Yeah.
forward here.
Yeah, that's correct. And Lisa, in answer to your question, I believe we paid $13,800. They've been the incumbent auditor for probably close to 14 years. So I imagine when given the opportunity to bid, they kind of right-sized everything from a pricing standpoint. The other qualified bidder was Zelenkoski Axelrod. They are a regional CPA firm. They have a number of offices in Pennsylvania. They have an office in Delaware. They also have an office in Annapolis. The primary support for Garrett Park's audit would come from the Harrisburg and Annapolis office. All of their CPAs are registered and licensed to practice in both Pennsylvania and Maryland. One of the things they noted in their proposal is that they do have staff who used to work in the public sector. And so they kind of, to quote them, they not only know accounting and auditing aspects of public sector entities, they also know how they work. They are not proposing to use any subcontractors. Everyone who would be assigned to Garrett Park's engagement would be an employee of Zelenkowski Axelrod. They have a long laundry list. Their proposal is included in your agenda packet of municipal clients. They include the city of Havre de Grace, the town of New Windsor, the town of Hampstead, both of which are in Carroll County, the town of Rising Sun, and the town of Thurmont. After reviewing the proposals, I think it was the collective opinion of Ms. Redke, Kayla, and myself, that we would recommend award of a 3-year contract to Zelenkowski Axelrod for the FY 2025, 26, and 27 audit, with 2 optional 1-year extensions. We recognize, I think, in making that recommendation that their pricing is higher than that of Watson Rice. But our collective feeling was that Zelenkowski Axelrod's experience is more directly on point with what Garrett Park needs for its audit, and we are also uncomfortable with the use of subcontractors. That just creates the opportunity for a lot of things to go wrong. Ms. Redke in particular, as the person who works most closely with the auditors, was particularly uncomfortable with that aspect of their proposal. I share that concern. She was also felt like their client list, basically, some of the work wasn't particularly representative. Auditing contractors who work for the federal government, to check their incurred cost, which is some of the primary experience of one of the proposed subcontractors, is very, very different than doing a municipal audit. I did conduct reference checks with the city of Havre de Grace. They've been with them, as I recall, over 10 years. The town of Rising Sun also has a fairly long history with them, not quite as long as Havre de Grace. And the town of Thurmont, I think the least number of audits that Zelenkowski Axelrod had performed for either of those 3 local governments was about 4 years. All the references for Zelenkowski Axelrod were glowing. They said they were very pleased by their experience with the firm. They praised the staff's professionalism, the quality of their work, their organizational skills, their timeliness in getting the audit done, and their responsiveness to any questions that either occurred during the audit or outside of the audit, which does come up from time to time. Recognizing that there is a price difference, I did attempt to reach references that were provided by Watson Rice. One reference, basically the email address bombed. It was an unusual state address. I tried a different variation of it, and that was rejected as well. That appears to have been, as best as I can tell from just reading through the entire proposal, that one reference for Watson Rice did work for the Office of the Attorney General. They appeared to be providing some support service in terms of legal cases that were taken against certain banking institutions, as best as I can discern. Another reference was with the federal government. She was out of the office and not returning until tomorrow. Her backup point of contact that you were to contact if you needed something urgent. Also, I got an out of office notification for her. The third person who worked for the Public Service Commission, that's with a short duration contract, did email me back immediately last week to say that he would be back in touch, and then did not follow up. I did try to reach him again today. So recognizing that there is a price difference, I did try to do some due diligence regarding Watson Rice, despite the staff's discomfort with the proposal, but just was unsuccessful in reaching any of their references.
It's a big difference.
It is a big difference, and would our current budget proposal accommodate this increase?
Yes, it would. That was something, as we were going through it, Jerry, I did go back and look at specifically.
The motion on the table to entertain,
Yes,
the motion would be
to approve Zelenkowski Axelrod for a 3-year contract with 2 extensions
Yes, that would be the motion.
Second. For purposes of discussion, if there's no second, it'll die.
Do we have any other options?
Those were the ones who submitted bids.
When does the audit process start? Well, I'll second it for the purpose of discussion. So that we
Yeah.
can have this
All right.
discussion. So when does the audit work begin?
There's actually some initial work that is typically done even before the end of the fiscal year, particularly since we are contemplating a change. I mean, we will be changing auditors. So there's usually some initial kind of ramp up work beginning in late May into June. The majority of the work is done in August. I would also say that we are required to file our audit report with the state by October 31st. And if you don't get into the queue with an auditor, you may not have one, which would obviously be problematic. So I would encourage y'all to make a decision as soon as you feel comfortable doing so. And there is some time, recognizing there is some time sensitivity to this matter. By the way, Mayor Keller, I did just hear back from Councilmember Schulp. He said he's experiencing some technical difficulties, but he is attempting to rejoin the meeting as soon as possible.
All right.
Just so frustrating that this seems to be a pattern we're experiencing, not just tonight, but in previous bid reviews where we're losing more local and regional firms for technicalities in the bidding process. And it just kind of makes me concerned that our process is disadvantaging local companies and smaller companies.
Which I think we should be trying to encourage,
Right.
because we're a little teeny town. I mean, that's the
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah, I mean,
So, you know,
if-
why we're, it just seems a little over.
yeah, if I may, I don't, and I'll just be blunt, I don't view the town as disqualifying these firms. I view these firms as disqualifying themselves. The process is quite clear. In our proposals, we have a checklist of items that are required. And if a firm fails to provide those, I don't see how that burden falls on the town. And I would say, I certainly with the audit firms,
It's like Tacoma Park used for their, or Chevy Chase or some of these local other
yeah, just
municipalities. Who do they use for their audits?
I can look it up. What I did is I went through a number of local municipalities, jotted down who performs their audits. I mean, there's a handful of firms that are typically kind of well-known who do audits in Maryland. And as I mentioned earlier, we actually contacted those firms, asked who the point of contact was, who should receive an RFP, and the RFP was actually delivered directly to those firms.
And they didn't respond.
Some of them did not respond. Some of this, I know one of the questions I got asked by one of the prospective bidders, and I think this impacts some of the things with the town. When you have vendors for very, very long periods of time, one of the questions that one of the prospective bidders ask is your incumbent auditor allowed to bid? And in the bid addendum, I stated yes. They asked whether we wanted to move on from our current auditor. I said, we have no opinion. We're just trying to basically find the best firm that we can to meet our needs. Sometimes when you have very, very long vendor relationships, other firms look at this as potentially, I believe, that you're just going through the motions because you feel you have to, not that you're really interested in making a move. I think that came up with one of the other services shortly after Kayla started that we were bidding out, or we were trying to get quotes. And it's been a service that we've had difficulty getting people to bid on. And I think that's probably part of it when you've had I think it's understandable if you're a firm putting together a proposal, which certainly takes some of your staff time. I think it's a logical, if incorrect assumption that the town's not open to other proposals when you've had the same auditor for 14 years. I think we sent in addition to posting it on the state procurement site, I believe, Jeanette helped me with this, I believe we sent it to 6 firms directly who perform local audits that I'm aware of.
Any further questions? Uh,
Move the-
I'll just, Phil, can you hear us at this point? Okay, no. If there's no further discussion, we will vote on the contract award of independent audit services to Zelenkowski Axelrod for a period of 3 years with 2 more extensions. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Alright, so Zelensky cough, is that who you're saying?
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, I said this was like what's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if we rebid it, that's such a delay in the process. It's just frustrating.
Bill, can you hear us? Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
All right, next item on the agenda for action is adoption of the ordinance introduced at the last council meeting, ordinance number 2025-2, chapter 4, section 403 of the town code to amend and add requirements regarding variances from the building regulations. Barb, we've looked at this. I'm not sure. Are there any changes since the introduction last month?
No, Mayor Keller, there are not. The only thing I would just note is that as required under the state land use article, this ordinance after introduction was sent to the county council. The county council acknowledged receipt of the proposed ordinance and provided no comments on it.
For purposes of getting this on the table for discussion, I will entertain a motion to adopt ordinance number 2025-2 introduced at the last meeting, and then chapter 4, section 403 of the town code.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion?
Well, when we went and saw the property on Claremont yesterday, we talked about, do we want to do anything to restrict the height?
But this is just with respect to variances.
Okay, so this is
No.
that. Okay.
Next is building permits and standards are 2 more down. All right. If there's no discussion, we'll move to a vote on adoption of ordinance number 2025-3. I'm sorry, -2, amending chapter 4, section 403 of the town code. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. It's unanimous.
Mayor Keller, I'll just note, Councilmember Schulp indicated that he can't hear anything because I knew he wasn't responding. I've just chatted Henry to see if she's having any issues, but I'm not sure what we can do to help Councilmember Schulp.
Did we send him a link that he could click to access the?
Yeah, he's actually in the meeting. He's just saying that he can't hear.
I've done that before. That
I'm
can
sure.
work. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to help him work
Yeah,
out.
why don't we take a moment then?
Yeah, if you can just give us a moment. He's saying that I am to be muted because otherwise there's feedback. Let me just see if I can have him try to dial by phone.
Okay, shall we move to adoption of ordinance number 2025-3, introduced at the last meeting? This is an ordinance to add a new chapter 13 to the Code of Ordinances and provisions concerning procurement and disposition. Kayla?
Thank you, Mayor Keller, for teeing this up. Thank you to the council members present. I know we've had many conversations about procurement. We've gone through many rounds of drafts. Councilmember Schultz, I'm glad to hear that you can hear us. Thank you for joining in. This ordinance was introduced at your most recent regular town council meeting on March 10th, 2025. There is one section that I am recommending be amended before you proceed to adopt the final ordinance. I want to credit Mayor Keller. A conversation with him realized that I had failed to contemplate the idea of oral contracts and as such had not worked with town attorney Ron Bolt to incorporate language expressly prohibiting it. I've never encountered an oral contract, so I appreciate Mayor Keller highlighting that oversight. The recommended change would come in Article 2, Part 1, Section 1306. What Town Attorney Ron Bolt and I are recommending the language be amended to read, and I'm going to read this directly into the record for you all. A formal written contract issued by the town and signed by both parties shall be required for procurement involving any expenditure. For the routine purchase of goods and services, a purchase order signed by both parties shall satisfy the requirements for the written contract. No oral contract of any amount shall be entered into by any elected or appointed official of the town. If town council is amenable to amending Article 2, Part 1, Section 1306 to reflect that language, you would want to make a separate motion to amend the ordinance. And then once that motion to amend has been approved, then you would be able to move to adopt ordinance number 2025-3 as amended.
Have there ever been any such oral agreements made, oral contracts?
Not to my knowledge during my time with Garrett Park, but I will remind folks, I'm coming up on 3 years with you all. I don't know if there were ever oral contracts entered into before Town Manager Matthews and I were present. We would both do our best to, pardon my language, kill any oral contract before they are agreed to. Part of the reason we have written contracts is that everyone has a consistent agreed upon standard, so that even if there is turnover between staff on either side, everyone knows what we're all committed to.
Wouldn't it be implied that there's a written contract even without this? I mean,
So the written contract or purchase order is pretty heavily seated throughout the ordinance. It's just that there was never an express sentence that prohibited oral contracts. And as I mentioned, I've never encountered one, but when Mayor Keller brought it to my attention, I realized that was technically a window left open that while I don't think any elected officials I see tonight would use, I unfortunately don't know what elected officials of tomorrow would do. And so both Town Attorney Ron Bolt and I agree that it's better to incorporate some language just so that future councils and staff have something to refer to.
Yeah, it seems like a practical inclusion.
so we want a motion to amend,
To accept.
to accept the amendment, to ordinance number 20.
Well, let's see, we have a motion to adopt as introduced. I think we now need a motion to amend.
You did not,
Oh, we
there's no motion to introduce.
Just amend first and then
Oh.
introduce the.
we to adopt first and then amend.
Adopt 2025-3.
Second?
Second.
All right. Further discussion before approaching an amendment.
I am curious, given the conversation we had earlier today, if town staff have any recommendations of anything we could do to encourage more local
Smaller
contract
companies.
opportunities.
While I'm sure Town Manager Matthews and I could offer suggestions, I would not offer them as part of the procurement ordinance. It would generally be more in when Town Council is directing us to issue an RFP. I think there's room for a broader conversation, perhaps in a workshop setting, to talk about what Town Council considers a curable offense versus a disqualification offense. I think that potentially is the area where Town Council and town staff are not necessarily in alignment. But that is very much more of a direction from council to staff. If the direction from council were to be that we should offer any firm, whether they be local, regional, or national, that any firm who bids should be offered the opportunity to cure a bid, that's a conversation to be had. Part of it is we do a sealed envelope bidding process, which means we do not prematurely open bids. Looking back at the earlier conversation tonight about the bids for routine and emergency tree service, the disqualified bid was the first one received. It was received more than 2 weeks before the deadline. I did have an office person contact me to confirm that that sealed bid had been received. And in the conversation where I confirmed receipt of that bid, I did indicate you have submitted before the question deadline. If you would like to withdraw it so that you may see the information that comes out in the question deadline, that was conveyed to them. They did not withdraw their bid to resubmit, but our RFPs do allow for withdrawal of a bid. We don't prohibit before the bid deadline resubmitting a bid. I can say I caught both Town Manager Matthews and I very much off guard that they submitted before the question deadline. If I were to give it a comparison, it would be a student who stopped coming to class at the midterms, but then still showed up to take the final. There is information that's covered in the remaining time that would be beneficial to them and their chances of success, and it is surprisingly alarming. But to circle back to Councilmember Bennett's original comment, I don't see that as something that needs to be baked into the procurement RFP. We do have a requirement to bid out professional services at least every 5 years. We can be directed to do that sooner at council's discretion. And I do think Councilmember Bennett's point would be better served by a broader conversation about what is a curable versus non-curable offense. I just don't see an avenue to incorporate that into the ordinance, nor do I see it being practical to look for such an avenue.
So essentially, we should focus on trying to get local businesses. But if we put that in the ordinance, we will lose out perhaps and restrict unnecessarily the opportunities that are presented to us.
I'm not sure if that would be the way I would phrase it. What I will say is in this ordinance, other than requiring that services be put out for bid at least every 5 years for professional services, we don't get into the nitty-gritty of the RFP details. That was a conscious choice that town staff and town council made over the course of many procurement discussions, recognizing that what's necessary and required for an audit RFP is not going to translate so neatly to a tree services RFP. What I would suggest potentially as a goal-setting measure is council indicate to staff direction of when you bid out this service, we consider XYZ to be a curable offense. As I've said before in this meeting, I think it is something where we can all come to alignment, but I don't think it's going to be, I mean, the details of if you forget half the pricing for an audit RFP, you are the people we need to be very, very good with the numbers so we don't find ourselves in legal trouble with a number of parties. That is a significant grievance offense. It sounded like from the conversation earlier tonight that some members of council wouldn't necessarily consider forgetting half of the bid pricing to be a disqualifying offense for a tree services RFP. We are going to encounter many situations, and I think a broader conversation about what we allow to cure, because the unfortunate thing is a lot of our local firms are smaller. They are potentially not used to submitting a sealed envelope bid. They might not have the experience to fully appreciate that when I informed them they submitted before the question deadline, that they had an opportunity to withdraw, that was without me overstepping, flagging for them that this could potentially cause an issue. Unfortunately, a lot of these firms sometimes have to learn by the painful process of being disqualified for not including vital information. As much as I wish that I could teach all the firms in the world out of my own head what they need to know, that is not a viable and practical option. So at this point, I turn it back to council to decide if you wish to move to amend ordinance number 2025-3. Phil, before we get too far into that, Town Manager Matthews has asked me to confirm that you don't have any questions. Please feel free to use the chat if your microphone isn't working. We're hoping we haven't lost you. Councilmember Schultz, if you can hear us.
Do we know how to call them?
Town Manager Matthews is trying to text him to figure out what's going on. In the absence of questions.
Well, thank you for that, Kayla. I would say I think that's potentially a pretty narrow review of the potential options to address the problem. While yes, the two cases we had tonight had to do with specifically missing items during the sealed bid review. Other ways to correct it could be more educational, things we put in the RFP to promote more local, perhaps giving more time for our bids to be out on the review. Is there a state requirement when we public use the state service?
There's no minimum threshold for how long we can put it out. Town Manager Matthews and I generally like to give at a minimum 3 weeks. We tend to skew closer to 4 or 5 weeks for certain larger projects that require a pre-bid meeting, such as the town hall design contract. I believe that was out on the street for just over 6 weeks. So we do try and give ample time so that firms have time to not only reach out to staff. I can tell you there are plenty of firms that love to ask questions. One of the firms that you awarded a tree contract to tonight, I think I got 6 or 7 emails asking, what about this? Can you help us understand that? We make it a point to try and be as responsive as possible. When we set this question deadline, we are monitoring our emails in a level that is not great for our stress, but means that we see everything coming in, and we do make a sincere effort to turn around the compiled list of questions and answers as quickly as possible to maximize the time that firms have to review that additional information. We can definitely look into other areas to post RFPs, recognizing that smaller local firms might not have become established on Emma. It is something of a process, whether you are putting it out as a purchaser or a vendor to get yourself set up on Emma. They are notoriously strict about deactivating accounts that have not posted or interacted with something on Emma within, I think, 45 days. So when I say Emma is at times a challenging place to work with, but that's part of why, as Town Manager Matthews discussed earlier, we do make it a point to research who our neighboring municipalities are using and to reach out to them directly. People are a lot more likely to respond to an email. I can tell you that when we had the trash, yard waste, and recycling contract go out many moons ago, I was looking up every trash firm. It felt like in a 50-mile radius, trying to find their contact to send it directly to them.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate that, Kayla. And I do think that probably is our best way to address this is marketing and not just relying on Emma, but
no,
I do appreciate, it sounds like the length of bid times are very reasonable, given our own need to not let things sit out there too long. All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Are there any further questions, information about the process I can provide? We've no response from Councilmember Schultz, unfortunately.
All right, before we discuss the need for an amendment, you'll have to refresh my recollection. I remember raising the issue of oral contracts. I don't remember saying they should be prohibited. But,
You did not say it, but when I was reviewing the ordinance after you and I had our conversation,
okay,
it did strike me as one of those minor things that, as I said earlier, I don't think anyone in this room would commit to an oral contract. However, because of the potential a mess to sort out later about scope of work and pricing, I thought it best to reach out to Town Attorney Ron Bolt to ask his thoughts of, did he think it was necessary to expressly prohibit it? He, like many other municipal attorneys, does not like the idea of oral contracts, would like to see it as a door firmly shut. And I don't routinely turn down qualified legal advice. So when the town attorney said, you should probably shut that door, my attention turned to language to shut that door.
all right. Well, the official of the town is pretty restrictive. If we don't want a threshold in the language before that seems to negate the language in the introduced ordinance, which says a formal written contract shall be required for expenditures more than the competitive bidding threshold, which is currently $15,000. The amended language seems to say that a formal written contract is required for any expenditure.
I will point to the second sentence. For the routine purchase of goods and services, a purchase order signed by both parties shall satisfy the requirements of the written contract. I was also a little alarmed by that language when Town Attorney Ron Bolt edited my initial simple version so that it would be less in conflict with itself and with the rest of the ordinance. And he confirmed that for something like the weekly cleaning of the town office, which we do have a cleaning firm come in to do, a purchase order would suffice.
Okay.
No, so
A non-routine purchase, both cannot be made orally and must require a formal written contract. That is the way I read the proposed amendment.
that is the way I'm reading it as well.
Okay.
Obviously, the contracts we have for something like the town hall redesign will be much more in-depth than the contract we executed for the work at the maintenance shed at the rear of 4600 Waverly Avenue.
Well, I'm sort of interested at the opposite extreme. I was trying to promote attendance at the post office lobby on a Saturday to review some Randall Park designs once. I said, come by for some noodles and a cup of coffee. It's a shameless inducement to have people look at the to stop by the black market and make an early arrangement for the supply of coffee. Over this procurement policy.
Thought that there was a category of purchases that.
So the competitive bidding threshold, which is what I believe Councilmember Bennett is referring to, is the threshold at which by state law we must post to Emma to receive bids. Anything under that, we are not required to post to Emma, but we may post to Emma just to try and get it out there.
No, I meant, I'm trying to find it now, but I thought that there was a.
Are you
Maybe it
referring?
was under the definitions referring to routine supplies or something like that. Well, I guess maybe for, Kayla, how would you answer, the mayor's question? If the
That,
town were making a purchase of that nature, would there have to be a signed, purchase order?
yes, the way the amendment language is currently written, there'd have to be a signed purchase order. I imagine that Ron Bolt, if you were to send an email confirming what you discussed, which is something that I think all of us have done at some point if we've had a verbal conversation to follow up of, hey, as we discussed at Black Market, I would like you to provide nibbles for the purposes of inducing folks to look at these plans. We've agreed to pay you, or we've agreed to compensate you in whatever manner. Unfortunately, Mayor Carroll, I can't remember how you compensated for that, but that would suffice as a purchase order, is my understanding, because there is a written scope of work committed to, there's a written acknowledgement of compensation. If this is of deep concern to council tonight, I would recommend that we withdraw the motion to amend and withdraw the motion to adopt, so that I can go back and talk with Town Attorney Ron Bolt about this, and we can bring it forward at a future meeting once I've had a chance to confirm with him the very, very minor oral contracts.
What's the concern with the way this is drafted now? It's too precise in terms of requiring a written contract. Is that the concern?
That is my understanding of Mayor Keller's.
Just be- Contract is only required for procurements involving a single expenditure of more than the competitive bidding threshold.
It is a competitive bidding threshold.
That is set by the state and it's set at 15,000. They might periodically raise it or otherwise alter it, but that's something the state controls and we do not.
That's already a medium-sized contract for this town.
Mhm.
right?
So purchase of supplies would have to be done by a purchase order signed both by the town and by the supplier.
Yes. Which is pretty much our standard practice anyway for goods and services.
How do you, when you, when the town provides, refreshments for when we invite the state delegation, what's the process for that?
So the process for that is I will reach out to someone who does catering. I will generally do this via email, just so I have a record of when I reached out to them. I will say, I've looked at your online catering menu for a size of 10 to 15 people. I believe it'd be appropriate to offer them XYZ amount of food. What I'm seeing online is, are these your current rates? They will generally email me back and say, you might want to adjust your food ordering up or down based on the number of people we're trying to feed. They will say, we've confirmed these rates are current, or actually we meant to update, that was last year's rate. There will be back and forth. I will then generally be sent a purchase order and an online link to pay via card. And that confirms, are they dropping it off? Am I going to pick it up? What exactly is being ordered? At what price point? And that's kind of what goes with the credit card statement when I have to explain to our town accountant what exactly I charged the card.
So that counts as a written contract.
That counts as a written contract or purchase order. I do want to emphasize that the inclusion of the routine purchase via purchase order was meant to help alleviate, so that we're not throwing contracts at the smaller things. It's really meant to be, let's create a written record that has some minimum standard so that we know what we're spending money on, because this is your tax money, your neighbor's tax money. And there's a reason Town Manager Matthews and I are very consistent about requiring written confirmation of things. It's that we can explain to you precisely what we did, so that there's no question of why is there $156 charge on the card. That was us feeding you and the state delegation dinner so that you could talk about Garrett Park issues to folks who can advocate for you at the state level.
Well, you know, interestingly, I hadn't thought about this before this discussion, but when you read section 1317, it's kind of
Mhm.
around midway of page 9.
Yes, the other
Just
categories.
the other categories that are exempt from competitive procurement. It doesn't talk about supplies, it doesn't talk about refreshments. Like all the examples we've been coming up with aren't covered by any of these exemptions. So I'm wondering if this list is maybe inadequate now upon 10th review.
It very well might be, and that's part of the reason why we have taken our time with review. If this is something where you'd like to propose an amendment to add item 7 under the exempt from competitive procurement category to include refreshments, regular office supplies, what have you. I'd leave that up to you.
Given the language, it seems to exclude anything not listed specifically.
I think having a written
I'm sorry.
request is a good idea with a price and a date so that we know what we're spending before we. Because I think relying on verbal can really be confusing and
Mhm.
subject to,
With that,
Right.
I'm just realizing as a part of this conversation that we haven't even exempted from
Anything.
competitive procurement processes.
Right.
Some of these kind
smaller.
of routine
Okay.
purchases.
Yeah.
Councilmember Bennett, Councilmember, I'm sorry, Councilmember Eisenstadt, I was talking over you. Councilmember Schulp has reached out to Town Manager Matthews via chat. He is suggesting that we not proceed with the ordinance given this turn of the conversation.
Yeah, he texted and then he just put in the chat. He's saying, I suggest withdrawal of the ordinance. I think he means not move forward with adoption, so we can discuss the issue of allowing bids to be cured and what could be cured without causing issues with other bidders. In his text, he had also raised, I think you all somewhat moved on from this issue, but he was talking about, wanting to make sure that giving someone a do-over would not cause legal issues with other bidders. So he, sharing that comment with you.
Mhm.
Understood. Motion is we defer this for further consideration.
Yes.
Further discussion.
He said withdrawing the,
Right.
but I think.
To do that, to do that, we can do two things. We can have it done. Or we can withdraw the motion, but I think the introduced ordinance, if it is included within a certain time from charter, and refresh my recollection as to what that time frame is, we'll have to reintroduce if it's less than 60 days.
In essence, we would just be tabling it, right, not acting.
I'm sorry?
Be tabling it and reintroducing it later.
Yes,
Okay.
because it wouldn't remain viable in its current state. And you might want to consider inflicting yourselves on official 1 hour after he or she takes the oath. So seriously, let's.
Mayor Kelly, you are correct. The charter talks about, an ordinance can't be adopted, no, not less than 6 days or more than 60 days after the meeting at which an ordinance was introduced. Shall be passed, amended, rejected, blah, blah, blah.
Councilmember Schulp, it sounded like you might have been offering a comment. However, that did not come through clearly. If you'd like to try again, or if you'd like to convey via message in the chat to Town Manager Matthews, we'd be happy to give you a moment to get that written down.
Can you hear me?
Live.
Okay, Joe.
Then you got.
What? Just to inform, I suggest that we can defer Typically, it's a short. So.
My main thought,
Just.
My apologies, I didn't understand that, Councilmember Schultz, and I don't think anyone else understood that in the room.
He said he hates Brad.
oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure. Okay, now it's audio's working. So
Yes.
my main thought here was
Not hearing you
simply
too well.
Yeah, you're going in and out, Phil.
We can't hear your words. We have to check.
I just wanted to make sure that if we allow a do-over, that we don't get ourselves in trouble. I mean, it's
You cut out, but my
very
understanding is
unusual, at least where you're supposed to be responsible to make sure that you've done your best and most responsive bid, which I know at least in one low, but they won't. I'm concerned if we allow a do-over that others bidders might complain. And if it's supposed to be a sealed bid,
We can't understand.
I think from
It
what has been chatted to
wouldn't,
Tom,
that information be
if I'm understanding Councilmember Schultz correctly, based on his prior
Be
messages to Town Manager
unknown
Matthews,
until
he's concerned that there would be
time.
legal challenges if we allowed some firms to cure if we're not careful with how we allow it.
Okay, that's a different issue from this one.
E- Exactly.
So we've already addressed that issue. Okay. So we need to move to the one we're on.
My suggestion was that if we defer it tonight, we take it up in late June with the new council. So discussion, but guided by the content of the proposed ordinance. So that whatever we do introduce, would have to do.
That doesn't require any action at all, right?
You had a motion.
Suggest it. Standard, it's a procedural matter, not necessarily substantive.
Okay, so move to a vote. Unless-
Well, let's.
Well, so I just wanted to double
Yeah.
check those, who are present. Are we that far away from being able to approve this?
We can-
Because we have Kayla's amendment, and then I was just suggesting the addition of like 3 words, supplies and refreshments be added to one of those lines of exemptions from competitive sourcing.
Below $15,000.
Right, and we had come up with a solution to address Phil's concern, which is that we look at 2 procedures outside, that we not offer more leniency inside this document for the sealed bid process, that we look to other ways to encourage local bidding. So it just doesn't seem to me that our discussion here has actually led towards where we need to drop all the work we've done and delay it for another 3 months.
Okay. So it's been moved to adopt as introduced a month ago. Is there a motion to amend that would be necessary to incorporate the language suggested by staff?
And by the council member.
May
Done
I
it.
Yeah, so I'll-
suggest that we have an amendment, a motion for each amendment? We have one motion to amend to adopt the language of staff. Yes, I think that would just be cleaner so that we clearly have the existing language for the amendment adopted and then the language being offered by Councilmember Bennett as a separate motion, just for my note-taking purposes and for the minutes later on. I think that'd be cleaner.
Okay, so how about a motion, I move that we adopt the ordinance, amendment. On the proposed language for Article 2, Part 1, Section 1306. Shall we read it or,
No, I think we can just refer to it.
okay. That's the motion.
I'll second that amendment.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Is there a further?
Did you vote on that? Councilmember Schultz, did you vote aye or nay on the amendment for Article 2, Part 1, Section 1306?
I think we lost him.
Yeah, it's not, his technology is not working.
He's in a remote place perhaps.
Okay,
Where is
so
he?
I don't
we
know where
lost
he is.
Councilmember
He
Schultz.
had Adirondacks, I think.
I thought we were gonna say.
Uh,
I guess Western New York is a remote.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion for an amendment to amend. Now, I moved my page and I'm trying to refind it. Section 1317, other categories. Number, I'm gonna pick the right one,
Number 7 would be the next number.
just
correct?
add a number 7.
Mhm.
Supplies, refreshments, is there anything else you would add? And other. minor
Miscellaneous.
purchases? Other miscellaneous. minor-
I,
Purchases of less than X amount.
supplies, refreshments, and other minor purchases related to the standard function of town business.
Yes, as Kayla said. For number 7, that's my proposed amendment.
All right, second,
I'll
please.
second it.
Second, any discussion? It's been moved and seconded that section
1317.
Pause.
1317 to.
Keller.
Oh, okay.
Councilmember Schultz had a question. How, he wants to know how we define minor for the other minor purchases.
Well, we don't have, I mean, to be fair, we don't have to use the word minor because elsewhere in the document, we have purchase thresholds.
True. Councilmember Schultz, would that suffice if we remove the word minor? Please pause for a moment as Town Manager Matthews tries to,
We could say,
he's typing.
supplies, refreshments, and miscellaneous administrative
Expenses.
expenses.
Okay, Councilmember Schultz, Councilmember Bennett has offered miscellaneous administrative expenses. Would that be better? I think you attempted to speak to us. Unfortunately, we could not hear you.
Just tell him to send a chat.
Town Manager Matthews is attempting to reach him via chat. I appreciate the patience of everyone. Technology is great when it works, and when it fails us, it is a tad challenging.
So,
I do also want to take a moment to thank everyone for their thoughtful discussion of procurement. I know we've covered a lot of ground over the course of many, many months. Your time and patience is deeply appreciated.
It's nice to see this culminate.
Mayor Keller.
all right, read the amendment.
So what we are suggesting for this amendment is to add a number 7 to section 1317 other categories. Number 7 would read supplies, refreshments, and other miscellaneous administrative expenses.
And further discussion of the amendment as read. Here, call for a vote, all in favor? All right. There have been 2 amendments added to the ordinance it was introduced. Was there further discussion with respect to adoption of ordinance number 2025? As amended? For a vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Can we get Councilman Schultz to vote by chat?
I believe Councilmember Schultz and Town Manager Matthews are communicating via chat. If we could all just allow a moment
All right,
for
thanks.
typing to occur.
It's 3-0.
Okay, so
Zero.
thank you
Okay,
all very, very much. I'm sure you're all very happy to not have another conversation about procurement lurking in your feet.
okay.
And on
Thank
that
you for
note,
all the hard work.
Maybe talk about the difference between to see competitive bids for the coffee, but I would have had to have gotten a written contract. An oral contract would not do.
You would need to
you were
purchase-
correct. You would not have had to, under your own authority, put that out to bid as it is under $15,000, because as you may recall, town council made a conscious decision
Right,
to establish that we will comply with the competitive bidding threshold for posting to Emma, and then for contract signing and approval authority, anything under $15,000 provided is budgeted may be approved by the town manager or the mayor. Anything over 15,000 must come to council for approval. And
So, but in the example provided by the mayor the mayor could go to the black market, describe what he's looking for. And as long as he gets the receipt that shows what he's ordered. And does it have to be signed by both parties as a purchase?
I would have to confirm with
That-
Ron Bolt that the issuing of a
Let's not-
receipt would constitute the signature of the vendor we're purchasing from. When we purchase office supplies from Staples, them confirming what's in my cart and sending me an email saying, here's what you ordered and here's when it'll arrive, would constitute a signature, I imagine, in most places. If they didn't want to sell it to me, they would reject my transaction. I can confirm that with him, but
Okay. maybe,
A purchase order is a pretty,
maybe what we really need is a page and cheat sheet. of the policy that this ordinance replaces. Plain English that would permit us to have some comfort level engaging in certain purchases for the town. Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda for action tonight is introduction of ordinance number 2025-4, the proposed fiscal year 2026 budget. Barbara, I believe you have a presentation.
Yeah, I just wanted to just enter into the record, changes that were made from at your direction at the last work session on March 24th. And also just some, issues that staff identified as I was, bringing this ordinance preparation to a close. So beginning with revenues, if you look at account 1.0, and these will probably sound familiar to you because I sent you an annotated copy. If you look at 1.0, prior year carryover for revenues, you may recall that as of your preliminary budget discussion on March 24th, that number was 87,400. I did get the March numbers from Ms. Retke, and based on that updated information, that number has been changed from 87,400 as far as prior year carryover to 119,700. Going to expenses, there were just a few changes. In discussing, we have not yet received our renewal rates from the local government insurance trust. This is account 11.5. That number, very minor change, was originally $13,725, now $13,980. That's their preliminary estimate based on a percentage increase. On account 11.7, IT operations, as I was finalizing things, there was a digit I had missed into my own kind of work papers. So that data entry error was corrected in 11.7. In account 13.1, which is operating expenses pen place, that number has been increased from 46,000 to provide for the digital display in the post office lobby that you all had talked about at your meeting on March 24th. This includes not only the purchase of the equipment, but there will also be some associated electrical and low voltage work. Account 13.5, trees, parks and grounds. This relates to the renovation of the Cambria Park Field. Your direction on March 24th was to remove the $60,000 for doing some work to the field, and that became a capital project. So in 13.5, that number as of March 24th was 175,000. Based on your direction, it's been reduced to 115,000. And then I'm sorry, I overlooked one. If you go to 12.2, which is archives, I did have a discussion with Ms. McKinney, just kind of going over some of the notes she had given me. That number was originally 26,250. It has now been increased to that little notice cut it off at 28,960 something. That's to account for some additional meeting time on Sonia's part when she has archives committee meetings, as well as there's some discussion among the committee members of doing some special events to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the country, preparations for that. The last changes I just sort of wanted to highlight was just on the capital budget page. On March 24th, you all had directed that 26.2 sidewalks be taken down to 0 because we do not anticipate any sidewalk work in the coming year. In account 27.1 in capital, that number has been increased to provide for replacement of the main entry doors to the town office. In 28.1 utilities, as you'll note, 50,000 has been taken out of that account per your direction on March 24th. And I'm just highlighting kind of the major changes. The biggest change was a newly created count 29.1.3, which is Cambria Park. In discussing this issue with Ms. Retke, we were both in agreement that just given the magnitude of the project for the field and probably future playground replacement eventually at Cambria Park, that should have its own account rather than being bundled with other public spaces. The mayor, Councilmember Paskowski, and I and Mr. Miller met on site with Mr. Azar to go over what was desired for the field renovation. Mr. Azar indicated we should be able to do everything for $200,000 if there's no increase in the impervious area.
Does that include replacing the fence in the rear of the field?
It's some replacement of some fencing. And then basically I increased it to 225 just to provide for contingencies, because obviously with all the discussion of tariffs, it's a little hard to know where pricings are going to be. There was also some discussion at your meeting on March 24th about kind of some visioning, if you will, for Cambria Park. We did have a brief discussion with Mr. Azar at the same meeting. We were talking about the field. He kind of just scoped out some rough numbers for me based on kind of his knowledge of the town, what we all discussed on site. And he indicated that the funding in 32.6 under, which is capital planning other, should be sufficient to do some of the kind of visioning work for the park that you all had talked about.
Some of the what work?
Kind of visioning of what else, what other improvements
the
could be made to
design?
Cambria.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Good.
that was an issue I talked to him about, and based on the scoped out numbers he gave me, it was not a formal proposal because he needed to turn it around really quickly. But it did appear, based on his comments, that the funding would be sufficient. So those have been the changes made since your meeting on March 24th. Mayor, do you think there's any benefit to providing a high-level overview, or do you think we're set for any discussion that the group wants to have?
And we moved money for the town hall, right?
Correct, yes.
Yes,
And that's in there too.
line 27.
Yeah, some of that funding was basically in there before, so I apologize for not highlighting that, but yes, that's something you had talked about at your prior meeting.
Barb, you can tell me right away if I missed it when I stepped out to use the restroom. I think we had a resident email in and ask about why some of our anticipated incoming grant funds are not reflected in the budget. Could you just very briefly explain how that works?
Sure, and I think one of you had asked about this at your meeting back in February or March, I can't recall which, but in terms of the town hall, the $300,000, so there's a process we go through. The project has to eventually go through the Board of Public Works, so the funding is ours. We have to complete a capital grants application. Basically, from the time we got the funding, there was a brief hiatus where you weren't talking about town hall. And then you may recall there was some extended discussion for a period of a couple months about how to address the rear addition, whether that was to be reconstructed or rebuilt. That was a material part of our grant applications. And as I shared probably around November or December, that needed to be resolved before we could submit the grant application package. So at this point, I am waiting for the Maryland Historical Trust. They have requested some additional information as I was going through process. They have a required review. So we have not yet taken the project back through the Board of Public Works. That will determine the date upon which expenditures can be counted, essentially. So I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. It's not that we don't have the funding.
But this budget doesn't include the $500,000 from the
It doesn't,
state.
and truthfully, it will have to go through the same process.
Right.
Hopefully things will speed up a little bit with the Maryland Historical Trust. I got a whole laundry list of items very similar to kind of what occurred with Yandel, but a little bit more extensive than that. I think it becomes more material if you were not funding the capital projects that you wanted to fund. As I mentioned, when we talked about this back in February, I think there's some uncertainty when those funds will actually be received. It's a lot easier to basically add the funding because right now there is nothing stopping you from moving forward with the projects that you want to do.
Right.
That's already been resolved. And I think especially regarding town hall, I think there's some optics, and we've already been through that by probably prematurely adding funding last year, not knowing what the process would be at the state, of then having to possibly take funding out if those funds don't materialize. At this point, at least all the capital projects you all have discussed extensively are funded in the ordinance that is before you tonight for introduction. I think there's more of a downside to basically assuming when those funds would come in. It's just a matter of timing, and you can add that funding later.
Good.
Okay, and that also applies to the parks grant.
It does, yes. I think the other thing that we don't know, and I say town hall is a little bit murkier just because we haven't gone to the Board of Public Works, which we have for Yendel. We have to get everything done, as you might recall us discussing previously, before we can actually even file the paperwork with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So hopefully, I think that project will be done, but I also don't know how long it takes for the state to actually reimburse once the project is done and we file.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think that's adequate as long as we're keeping those notes in the monthly management report.
To get this on the table, I will entertain a motion to introduce ordinance number 2025-4, proposed fiscal year 2026 budget.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote. All in favor of introduction of ordinance number 2025-4, the proposed fiscal year 2026 budget as circulated, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz? He said aye.
I will observe that in our packet as attachment number 2, Bob included a single-page document, budget at a glance, which I thought was just terrific. And, with your permission, I will sit down with her a little later this week, a few, basically just formatting suggestions, and we will circulate that to residents. We will probably find it still incomprehensible, but at least we've made the effort. That concludes action items for this evening. Unfinished business. Bob addressed this, but essentially based on some email and other conversations from Councilmember Paskowski, who's out of the country, and others, we feel we have additional both factual and policy discussion that would be worthwhile before this ordinance is introduced. So that our treatment of it this evening can be relatively summary in nature. Barb, do you want to enlarge on that?
Sure, I'll just mention briefly, I did provide in the packet kind of embedded comments in there just to let you know what has changed since your meeting on March 10th. There have been several definitions that were added at the recommendation of the chair of the Land Use Advisory Committee. Those would be for building height, floor area ratio, gross floor area. There was also a discussion about main building. I believe it was Councilmember Bennett, I believe, who brought this up, a suggested revision. I did review that with the town attorney. He was fine with the proposed change. He just noted that if there's more attainable housing strategy initiatives get introduced, you would want to review that at some point. There was also a question posed at your last meeting by Councilmember Max, I believe it was, who asked whether a letter of credit would be sufficient to serve as a surety. Mr. Bolt, our town attorney, indicated yes, that could be done. He noted, however, that typically a cash bond personal check is preferred so that you do not need to fight with the surety provider as to whether there has been a breach. There was also some minor language that you all asked to be made on March 10th. This is page 4, section 7, subsection A, having to do with the tree protection plan. You all had provided some clarifying language noting that that was an individualized project requirement. Mayor Keller had inquired about a particular project in town and asked about the building permit and construction hours, which was a very helpful reminder to me that we probably should have, this is on page 6, that the construction hours should probably be noted, just so that if there is a violation, that we have some ability to have recourse if someone violates that. And then getting to the kind of heart of the matter, I think for you all, really has to do with pages 7 and 8. We had started this process in terms of trying to add some minimum rear yard setbacks as well as some side yard setbacks for accessory buildings. We've gone through a couple iterations of trying to hit exactly the right sweet spot, and I think that still requires some discussion. The language that is currently in your ordinance, the draft that is just for discussion tonight on pages 7 and 8, does mirror the county standards. I included in your agenda packet, just as I was working on this, Mr. Martin, our chair of our Land Use Advisory Committee, has been very helpful, as he always is. So in attachment 2, it's just an email exchange that I had with him in terms of, do the county standards generally work in Garrett Park? And I think the other question that had been posed at your meeting in March was, if we were to replicate the county standards, do they need to both be in the town ordinance as well as, since they're already covered at the county level? Mr. Martin indicated that as far as if we were to go that route, and I know that's not been decided yet, to mirror the county standards, he does believe, as does Mr. Bolt, as do I, that there is some benefit to having the standards in the town ordinance. It gives the Land Use Advisory Committee the ability to review for that issue. And also, I think just from a customer friendliness standpoint, someone can look and see everything kind of in one place from the town's perspective. Mr. Martin's opinion, once again, I know that's not held by everyone, is that he thinks the county standards do generally work in Garrett Park, and he notes that we can only be more restrictive. He's not seen instances where further restriction is merited. Obviously, Councilmember Paskowski, who is also an architect like Mr. Martin, did email everybody over the weekend since he's unable to be here tonight. Left at your place this evening was a printout of the comments he had shared. And in short, Councilmember Paskowski did have some concerns about the use of county standards, particularly I think when it came to kind of the height of accessory structures. So that's sort of a brief overview of where we're at. I know Councilmember Paskowski feels strongly about this issue, and I think, would like to be part of a future discussion about this matter. Yeah, in short, if I were to let me just pull out Councilmember Paskowski's comments for the benefit of our Bugle reporter and anyone else. He just expressed some concerns about restricting accessory building heights to 15 feet total height. And just kind of offered some comments highlighting one resident's garage with a loft over it. He notes that that garage is probably a little over 20 feet to the top, and
I think they're building one on Claremont.
he is referencing one on Claremont.
Yeah.
He's referring to a built structure. He notes that a new garage with a storage or a work loft would be around, he just goes through some height calculations. And essentially has concerns if the building height of an accessory structure were capped at anywhere near 15 feet.
But just for clarification, we're not capping it at 50 feet, we're just requiring a greater setback.
That's correct. That is correct.
Just for my understanding, what is the current setback for accessory buildings in Garrett Park?
The issue is we don't have them for accessory structures. There's nothing in the code.
So
they
right
can do
now,
whatever they
we
want?
just default to the county,
That would be correct.
and the county's is
5 feet, I believe.
Yeah.
Steve is deferring to the county.
This version that you have, not saying it's the magic number, currently what is in the ordinance draft on pages 7 and 8 mirrors the county setbacks. I think,
including the additional setback for greater height.
yes. So what, if you're on page 7, which is the minimum side yard setbacks, it says for any accessory structures It's basically set at, the minimum is 5 feet, and then it goes on to say for any accessory structure with a height greater than 15 feet, the setback must be increased at a ratio of 2 feet of additional setback for each foot of height in excess of 15 height. And then it also kind of goes through a similar increase in the setbacks based on its length. I hesitate to speak for Councilmember Paskowski. I think his email I think what his concern, I think, is that he, and once again, I don't mean to speak for him because I haven't had the chance to talk to him directly about this. I've seen the same email that you have. I think his concern is that there may be some lots in Garrett Park that simply don't have the space for these additional setbacks if over 15 feet. That's how I interpret his email anyway. And then there's a very similar kind of calculation on page 8. Once again, this is the county language. The minimum rear yard setback is 5 feet, but as the height goes up, the setbacks basically increase. And I believe that's the concern that he is raising. He basically has in his email restricting accessory buildings to 15 total height if in the corner where people will want to build a garage on a slender but deep lot so there's room to navigate around, relegates that garage to one level and makes a storage attic or work loft undoable. So I think his concern is following the county standard that would increase the setback as the height goes more than 15 feet. Might be unworkable for some people in town.
But I thought we didn't have the option.
We can make it more restrictive.
Which makes it worse. That is, which
Right.
restricts people further.
This is where I'm at fault.
Yeah.
Because it would be easier to just leave the county standard. And not restrict it further, which he seems to imply he does not want to restrict it further.
That is part of what he says. He does talk about, it characterizes some of our, I think he notes in his email that we restrict lot coverage to 18%, and he goes on to say that that is substantially less than 30% allowed elsewhere, including some areas close to Garrett Park. So once again, I think it's a little difficult to guide you because I don't want to speak for him.
So as the language is currently drafted, our intent was not to further restrict from current requirements as regards setback for accessory buildings. It was simply to explicitly state what is already required by the county ordinance. So it would be more clear for those seeking a permit. Am I correct?
Correct. You may recall at a very early version of this, the chair of the Land Use Advisory Committee, Mr. Martin, had suggested to myself, and then I also shared that with the town attorney, another, it was one of the Chevy Chases. I apologize. There's so many of them. I can't recall which one it was at the moment, but we originally had in this section, there was a reference not to one story because that can sometimes mean different things to
Right.
different people. So we had a 28-foot, I think, height restriction. I'd have to go back and pull the prior version. There were some concerns expressed about that. And so then in a subsequent version, which matches what you have before you this evening, then defaulted to the county standards, which, as you all note, currently, if there's nothing in the town code, it's going to default to the county anyway. I think the question is, do you wish to be more restrictive than what the county does?
And what is Steve saying you want?
Not clear.
Okay.
Yes.
You have it, he
Well-
has an email that is on your desk, I think. Tabletop.
I think there's some fairly basic factual things we need to ascertain first. Steve believes that the height is measured to the peak. The materials that were submitted and that I could find online suggest it's measured to the mean between the peak and the eaves. So so the draft deposits are 11 feet. Yes. I think
in the section D, on the main building, accessory buildings that are taller than 28 feet.
There was an older version that talked about 28 feet.
Of height, but that was a
Correct.
typo I thought we had
Ye-
determined.
Well, it says it right there.
Where?
It's been changed to 24. I think the same one,
Not a height.
Correct. There's two different, if we can, everyone can kind of.
oh, sorry,
Page
yes.
seven,
right,
yeah,
right.
page 7.
B, accessory building 5 feet or 10 feet for accessory buildings that are taller than 28 feet, period.
But that doesn't tell us what the limit is.
The 28 feet on some.
Uh, Attachment to,
Main building.
Oh.
25
Yes.
And B.
Yeah, this is,
But that's the old version, not the current version.
this was, I'm sorry, I apologize for the confusion. Perhaps I didn't want to truncate the email exchange, but this was an earlier version that Mr. Martin was responding to in terms of, are there benefits to having the county standards in the code? And does he think the county standards generally work? So this was the version that you had earlier. So basically, it was here's.
This isn't what we're doing today.
Correct. Yes. What happened is there was an earlier version and then there was the version that's before you tonight, which is just for discussion. Correct.
We should be focusing on this one.
That's what I would recommend. The value of Mr. Martin's email exchange, and I apologize for any confusion, was him answering the questions, and I was trying to lay out the trail of what had happened and what we had done in response. So I would look at attachment 2 strictly in the kind of 2 points that he does think there's benefit to having standards in the ordinance, even if they match the counties, and that he thinks county standards generally work in Garrett Park.
what is the county height limit?
Accessory building?
Yes,
Every reference I could find was 20. What I was not aware of was that being setback requirement.
If you look
tied to
at
the county as well.
Mr. Martin had appointed me, if you look at attachment 3, there is some information about, because I know there's been some questions about how the county measures building heights. I'm trying to think if there's anything in here in terms of the actual height limit. No, this is simply the measurement part, because there was some question about that had been raised. It depends on the zone. Let me see if I can find it online.
So it sounds like there's questions that remain before this can be resolved.
I think that's correct, Councilmember Eisenstadt. And I also think that Councilmember Paskowski would probably welcome being part of any discussion.
Yeah.
Because he does have strong feelings about this.
Could this be under, I don't know if these pages are numbered. But under that
Attachment 2.
Attachment 1,
Okay.
under D, main building B. It says the accessory building 5 feet for any accessory structure with a height greater than 15 feet. The setback must be increased at a ratio of 2 feet for each additional setback for each foot of height in excess of 15 feet, but it doesn't say what the maximum is. For any
Well, if-
accessory structure.
if the maximum is in fact 20, 5 additional feet of height, each one of which would require 2 additional feet of setback for a total of 10 feet, which is very significant.
if you think about it from the neighbor's perspective, 10 feet is not very significant. I mean, based on looking at the lot line relative to the building we looked at under construction, a few of us looked at yesterday. 10 feet is very close to the lot line.
Yeah, but that garage with the second story on that garage is gonna be taller than 10 feet. That
We're talking setback and we're talking additional setback. So 5 is the minimum. The additional setback that would be required would be 10 feet. So a total of 15. Yes,
If they want it to be above
20,
15 feet.
20,
a total of
well,
20.
20 feet, yeah. Well, what's your preference? My preference, my impression is that just based on our conversation tonight, we should have a dedicated session where we find basic facts.
Yeah, I think
The
it's a
other-
good invite.
The other thing I am completely unclear on is the measurement from what spot. The county materials seem unclear to me whether it's the finish grade, which could include moving soil around to affect that finish grade, or the pre-development level. And although it says whichever is more restrictive, which would imply the pre-development level if people have been adding soil,
Unless they're digging.
that's clearly not the way it is employed in practice. So I think we just need some fundamental factual
I think it would be beneficial. to
understanding.
invite, Land use committee members to participate in that work session as well, so that we're not just, trying to work it
Yeah,
out.
agree.
ourselves.
And I think it would be good if Steve was part of it.
Yeah, that's a
Well,
given.
yeah, that
Right.
is the,
So we're not gonna take any action on this today.
No,
Is that correct?
it was just for discussion only.
Good.
I think if you all, I can certainly reach out to Mr. Martin. Mayor Keller, do you envision this coming back in May, or do you envision it at a further out, given the election?
well, is there a sense of urgency to having this on the books before?
Not necessarily. Obviously, part of this was to address some gaps in our code, but they've existed for a while. I don't know that another 30 days or so is going to matter, 60 days.
Well, for the same reason I suggested earlier, I think it's difficult to ask a newly elected
Mhm.
member to deal with items of this sort on 1 hour notice. Yeah. On the other hand,
True.
scheduling work sessions is also always a challenge, so
You
perhaps,
must go look at the garage on Fairmont and see how tall it really is, how we feel about the height limitation.
um, if I could ask you as a temporary measure pending scheduling of one to hold the fourth Monday of May and the fourth Monday of June. Just as
Yeah.
placeholders.
Yeah, the fourth Monday of May is Memorial Day.
Right. I don't think
I'm sorry?
The
The
fourth
fourth
Monday.
Monday of May is Memorial Day. I'm out of town.
Oh. Well, then the fourth Monday of June. And for another item. Oh, business. Lisa. Let's go as a statutory committee.
Right. We wanted to make it a committee. And I think Barb introduced that. So do we need a vote?
Well, I think we need some direction. Question was, we talk about the elements of an ordinance before we send it to our council. The recent practice has been to have the council draft it, council SEL, the attorney draft it. We talk about it, then it goes back to the attorney. For a professional fee line item, which has been expanding for years now, we pay a little more attention to, perhaps giving direction in the initial instance.
Well, my
I think that was perhaps one of the points in circulating some of the existing language. For example, would a Costco ever the adjunct membership was initially intended to allow the continued participation of someone with particular expertise who is no longer a member of the committee. So, including people who lived out of town, somewhere along the line that got diluted to being someone who also had to be in town, which sort of defeated the purpose of the position. But there's combinations and permutations of that in the existing ordinances for the existing committees.
Well, I haven't heard about any introduction of an adjunct member of the committee not in Garrett Park with a specific amount of expertise. We've never talked about that in any of the POSCO meetings I've been to, so I don't see why it would need to be
Well,
included.
that was just an example. So, do we want to look at elements of establishing a committee, specific respect to what that committee does?
Sure. I mean, I can take
Well-
it back to the next POSCO meeting.
We can just, if we have strong feelings about it, one way or the other, if you have strong feelings, I'm just trying to suggest ways that we might back and forth with the attorney in terms of drafts.
The committee to provide us a first draft.
That would be another way.
POSCO.
So the
Didn't they send a draft, Barb, for making it a committee, or is there a?
I've never seen any of them. I mean, I think the key issues that seem to come up in looking at the other statutory committees is the current composition of the Parks and Open Spaces Committee is 5. Is that the number that you all want to continue? I think is one of the questions. What should the term of the committee members be? What is their scope of work or review, if there's something in particular, because all the committees seem to have something that kind of falls within that realm. And some of our committees certainly have stated in the code, certain committee members having certain desired expertise. So I think those are some of, I mean, staff can certainly take a shot at drafting something as well, whichever you all prefer, but I think those are the issues that need to be addressed.
Why don't we draft something and then make questions that we can talk at the
Okay.
next POSCO meeting about what they want in terms of the membership. But I do think we have a nice group of people who seem to be very interested in what's going on in the parks, and they seem to be very interested in contributing. So
Okay. Does anybody have any input on any of those issues that I should factor into the draft?
I think the number should be 5. And I think the term should be, 2 years.
Yeah, they're usually either 3 to,
Okay.
I think some are
3
3
years.
and some are 5, I think.
I would say 3
depending on-
years. I don't think any specific expertise would be particularly, I mean, if people don't want to volunteer and people who do want to volunteer don't have the specific expertise, I think it's still useful to have them on the committee.
Okay.
So that would be my sense.
Agree.
Anyone else?
And so town updates, Arboretum Committee, Julie.
Yeah, the committee has set a date for the spring tree walk, as May 18th. This year we'll be starting at Town Hall, so on the south side of town, to just, add some variety to the tour route. We will attempt to advertise that clearly to make sure that we don't end up with stray people waiting at this place, and also we might, post someone there to, refer people to the town hall start location.
What
Then
time
they-
will it be?
1 p.m. Thank you. That's a Sunday, May 18th. Committee is continuing to review the comprehensive arboretum plan. With a target to finish it by the end of the calendar year, and the next meeting will be May 14th. And I think Barb already covered some of the tree work.
I think that's Phil.
Phil, I don't know if, Phil, if you can hear us to do the archives report? Yeah.
I'll just note that at the last historic preservation committee, there was discussion of whether the town can and should further with respect to demolitions. And for a few years, I thought it might be worth looking into. I'm still exploring the possibility of putting together a small, short working group of people who would simply review the literature and was brainstorm some ideas
Sure.
with respect to an issue that was raised, which was preventing establishing incentives to retain from existing houses.
What kind of incentive?
I have no idea.
And where would the incentives come from?
Is that I, but my assumption is that the Fifth and 14th Amendments are still in effect. It's sometimes a close question if you haven't watched the news recently, but anyway, that'll be my assumption, and that our ability to bring donations is limited. That means we should look at the other side of the coin and see if we can incentivize donations. Keeping a house.
I think a lot of those decisions based on who the builder is the condition of a house, like the one up on Waverly on the left, that big beautiful house when the people got divorced and the house was falling apart and then they tore it down and built a new house. I mean, there's a lot of decisions that are made by a builder who's deciding to demolish and build new or try to keep an existing structure.
And whether tax credits might make a difference. I don't know.
I don't
All
know.
I'm saying is that it might be worth just to look into it.
Maybe some builders in town. We have a few. I mean, I think that kind of perspective might be
Oh,
helpful.
that's a very good suggestion. So I'll just, unless there's violent objection to doing so, I'll just continue to see if there's interest in a few, relatively few, relatively short, relatively focused.
Barnstable.
Yes.
Mayor Keller,
And maybe an architect would be good on there too.
Councilmember Shoup, just when you're ready for it, Councilmember Shoup would ask if I could give the archives report since he's having technical difficulties. So whenever you're ready.
Archives report.
By text.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I have it as well. Councilmember Shoup,
She has it. Oh, well, yes.
Okay,
I mean,
I don't wanna interrupt.
of course, go ahead.
because Ms. McKinney sends it to me as well. Regarding the oral history transcription project, she's transferred 13 MP3 files to Archives Committee member Joe May for transcription. She's completed the process and finding aid, Garrett Park Elementary School collection. She's updated past perfect records to reflect the consolidation of accession numbers, and she's received 2 glass door knobs from scheduled demolished Chevy homes. She has supported 1 resident with an office visit to research historical town council meeting minutes for their residents. She also notes in her report that she's installed a new exhibit on the history of the lending library. It's entitled "The Shelves Are Never Empty," and it looks at the origin of the book swap located in the post office from 1903 to the present. Ms. McKinney also attended the nursery school open house to introduce herself, as well as offer educational ideas for the older nursery school age students to inform them about the history of the town. And she's working with Kayla on ordering a new pedestal display for the post office lobby. And that's it.
Thank you, Phil.
Lisa, did you have anything further to ask to Bosco?
The only thing is that the Costco committee wanted to do a survey to find out what people in town felt about their priorities for open space and parks in terms of trying to understand what priorities might come after Yandell. And so they wanted some help from the staff, I think, to help with that questionnaire, but I haven't seen it yet, but that's what they talked about at the last meeting.
So is there anything for the council to do other than staff time spent on
That's it.
that? Okay.
But I think they're gonna provide a draft first before they have the staff do anything.
All right.
That would be good.
Yeah.
All right, the next order of business is a vote to enter a closed session pursuant to Maryland Code General Provision Article Section 30-305 B1 to discuss the employment and compensation of candidates for employment over whom the town council has jurisdiction and other personnel matters that affect these specific individuals. I need a motion to enter into closed session.
For this session,
Just make a motion.
I'll make a motion to
Okay.
enter into closed
Second.
session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We need to kick, Roberta left. And